We're good. Christian Preus, good to sit down with you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a long trip out here to Wyoming, but a lot of good things going on here.
Beautiful trip, right?
It's a beautiful trip, yeah. Once you get through South Dakota.
Exactly. you get across the Missouri River.
It happens immediately. That's what's amazing.
It is,
like
yep.
you come down, you see the river, and then you look on the other side and you go, it's getting beautiful.
We're in the foothills of the Rockies. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an antelope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And right from here, we can look out. We can see Mount Casper. Right?
Yeah, Casper Mountain.
Beautiful. Casper Mountain.
Mount Casper sounds, though, more dignified.
Because what's the name of the church? Mount Hope?
Yes.
Mount Hope Lutheran Church in Casper, Wyoming. Come check it out. But there's a lot of other stuff going on here in Wyoming. So we've got Luther Classical College. You've got a classical school here. Yes. So a lot of big things. And I really want to highlight what's going on with Luther Classical College because a lot of momentum, a lot of really key players, a lot of good work. And I think there's a lot of optimism on some of the things that this can do for the Lutheran Church and really for, conservative Bible-based Christians that take education seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Luther Classical College out here in Casper, Wyoming, but for the entire nation. We have students already pre-enrolled, so they filled out our pre-admission form. And for our first year, we're starting in 2025, so we have to do a lot of groundwork before we get to 2025. And but for our first year, we already have 80-some students kind of pre-enrolled. That is saying we want to come to Luther Classical College. We're only going to be letting in 60, right? And that number is just going to grow and grow of those who really want to come. So it's something that students are extremely excited for throughout the country, and so are parents and so forth, which is what we were expecting because I'm a parent, right? I'm a father. I have a 15-year-old son, right? And part of the reason that we started this college is because we looked at so many men and women, fathers, mothers, families that are like my age and older who have all of these children, and we're like, where are we going to send our kids when we're teaching them a classical education, right? In grade school, in high school, in homeschool. And then there is no classical college that's Lutheran in the entire world, right? Yeah. Certainly not in the United States. And so people have been talking about this for decades, literally. But the classical education movement has grown exponentially in the last decades. Mm-hmm. So like 20 years ago I was 18. Mm-hmm. So I was not involved in this conversation. But 20 years ago, a bunch of guys got together and they said, we need to start a classical college. We need to do this.
Is that basically this is the roots of what's going on here?
Yeah. Kind of. Indirectly. Mm-hmm. But the point is that like 20 years ago, people were already thinking of this. And like big names like, our district president, President John Hill. He was at this meeting. Prof at Concordia Theological Seminary, John Preus, was there. Gene Veith, everyone knows him. Mm-hmm. He, by the way, he and his lovely wife, they're going to be teaching intensives at Luther Classical College. I'm so excited for that.
He's great. What is post-Christian? Is that one?
Postmodern, Postmodern World, I think he wrote.
Okay.
He's fantastic.
Yeah.
Excellent writer.
Yeah.
And well known in the academic community. But 20 years ago, all these guys are meeting saying, we got to do this. Mm-hmm. But as often happens with meetings, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Why was that?
But someone needs to take the lead. So there's an ancient proverb. Everyone knows it. If you don't know the ancient proverb, you know it by experience. And that is, the beginning is half the work. Mm-hmm. Begin. Yeah. Right? So the beginning is half the work, so begin. Mm-hmm. And someone needs to just start it. Mm-hmm. And then half the work is done.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of just like, really? You're going to do this?
It's amazing. Once you start doing things, right? You just, all of a sudden you look back and you go, holy cow, a lot of things just got accomplished. And it was just because maybe you picked up the phone, maybe you sent the email, like you did whatever the next thing that needs to get done.
Yep.
So that didn't necessarily happen 20 years ago. Good idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that it's been wanted. The need's been seen for 20 years. And now the need is so obvious that it kind of had to happen. And it just took someone to begin it. Mm-hmm. And so I and a number of others said, let's do it.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of took the lead on that, right?
Yeah. I did. Pastor Rob Paul at Memorial Houston, he did also. And basically everyone on our board. Mm-hmm. So President John Hill, Reverend Andy Richard, he's been amazing. And what happened too is that we started a journal at the same time.
Is that this one right here?
Yeah, that's that one right here.
Christian Culture. We've been recording here, we've been kind of highlighting it. Actually, last night Jacob Benson and I were talking about an article, and he kind of glanced over and he goes, "Oh, that's it." I think it was the Sacred Imagination. He's like, "That's the article. It's right there." So so good stuff coming out of there. Yeah,
it's fantastic and different from like every other college magazine you're going to see, which is just going to be like, "Hey, here's what we're doing, and give us more money," and so forth and so. I mean, please give us more money, obviously, but it's all content. Mm-hmm. Like what you read there is what's going to be taught at Luther Classical College, right?
And isn't it? I mean, you talked about, okay, now my kid, my son's 15 years old. For me, I started looking into just kind of education in general as like a philosophical exercise, right? I'm interested in it. Now I've been, educated for X amount of years. So you're kind of like, okay, well, why are they teaching me these things? So it's kind of an intellectual exercise. And then you have kids, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at back when I was in New Hampshire, I'm looking at all the schools in the area, and I'm looking at their mission statements and, some of these Christian schools, and you go through and you're like, they don't even mention God. The only thing they say is that we see God more we show God more by our actions than our words. And I'm like, man, that doesn't sound good, right? So you just, all of a sudden, it's like, someone's going to form my child, if I'm going to send them to school for 40 hours a week, like that's a huge deal if I love my child. So it takes it from this hypothetical to this is serious business.
Yes.
And for you guys, that was kind of what moved it from, you already knew it. We can go into your background too. Like you very much understand this stuff through and through, but now you've got children coming of age and you're saying, okay, who's going to educate them? Because this is serious business.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, 20 years ago when I went to college, I was already frustrated then. Why am I reading from a textbook, some guy teaching me sociology, and I have to take this course? Why am I doing this? Why am I not reading historical works from whatever period this is? Fine, you want to teach me sociology? I'd prefer you not do that. Teach me history and politics and so forth. But why don't you give me the primary sources instead of having some guy filter it to me and tell me what I'm supposed to be thinking?
Was this even because you got a master's and a PhD in classics, right?
Yeah, so this is before. This is
undergrad
at Bethany Lutheran College. And I had some great classes there too that actually dealt with primary sources. Like we read Augustine's Confessions, and that's when I took those classes and saw, wow, what if all classes were like this, right? And but I had to go get a master's degree and a PhD to get classes that were all like this, right? Giving me the primary sources. And even then I didn't get any close to what I should have gotten in an undergrad and what people used to get in high school and undergrad. I mean, we have fallen so far from where we used to be, where 200 years ago, 100 years ago, in order to get into Harvard, you would have had to know Latin. I mean know Latin. Like you have to write an essay in Latin. Right?
Oh, wow. This is out of high school.
This is out of high school. Yeah. These were the expectations. And I don't say that Latin, who cares? Well, how about any language? Is that expected from anybody?
Even English grammar.
Even English grammar. Yeah, nowadays. So to be a high school graduate 100 years ago, 150 years ago meant something. You knew your stuff. And you take a look at the textbooks. The two most read textbooks were the Bible and Plutarch's Lives. Now, Plutarch's Lives. How many of the listeners of this podcast do you think?
I haven't read that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I read Plutarch's Lives 2 years ago. So here is classics guy
So you got a PhD in the classics.
And I'd read like portions of it, right?
Yeah.
Like we had for Caesar's for a class on Caesar, we had to read Plutarch's Life of Caesar, and we had to read it in Greek and all that. That's great, but never read Plutarch's Lives. Literally, schoolgirls and schoolboys 200 years ago would have been reading that in middle school.
And part of the importance there too is just, I mean, that's something that your average high school kid today would pick up, and they wouldn't have even the clue of they wouldn't have a clue how to even deal with it.
No.
Right. And you're saying 100, 150 years ago, intellectually, they were able to read these and wrestle with these kind of concepts.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Wrestle with these kind of concepts. The beauty of reading someone like Plutarch's Lives is a perfect example of what classical education is meant to be, because it's not simply a history with some guy just regurgitating facts to you, right? Mm-hmm. You should know what happened, how long the War of 1812 lasted. It turns out it lasted beyond 1812. Mm. I think the final battle was in 1815, which was after the treaty was actually made, which is too bad, because 2 million Brits lost their lives in Louisiana. But in any case, you read Plutarch's Lives, and you're going to see him constantly talking about religious influence, his own religious influence. He's going to be talking about the revelation of the gods or of God. He's going to be talking about moral character and how it builds a politician, and how when you fail in moral character, your entire city might fail. He's going to be talking about raw ambition and how it can ruin a man. He's going to talk about how sexual attraction and the influence of a single woman can move history in a certain direction, right? It's not just history. He's teaching you all about the life of a man and therefore of mankind, right? And so you see a commonality in humanity, but then you're also inspired to be as ambitious and virtuous and pious as some of these men and some of these women, right? Mm-hmm. So you lose all of that when you go away from the primary sources, and instead you just get instructed by this ridiculously boring textbook that tells you how big around the pyramids were. Mm-hmm. And that we discovered King Tut's body in such and such date.
So you kind of put your finger here on shifts in education, right? So, I mean, it seems like when you're describing, it's Plutarch's Lives, is that right? When you're describing that as you're going through, what is ambition? What does lust? What does all these things lead you towards, right? These things are formative to the reader as they're reading these things. They're being brought into this story. As you said, it's a story about a man, but it's a story about man, right? All men. And therefore, it's a story that applies to the reader. And therefore, they should be moved to love and appreciate that which they should love and appreciate, and to despise that which they should despise. So it's the whole purpose of that education is to form the student. To whereas when you're describing how big is the pyramid around, it makes no impact on me, the reader, right? And my eyes should glaze over because it doesn't have any impact on me unless I'm wired in such a way where I love numbers or whatnot. But still, it's not affecting my character. And therefore, it's not affecting how I'm going to be as a father or a husband or a citizen.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So this is what always happens when we start talking about classical education, is that we're supposed to be just talking about Luther Classical College and its founding, but we get into the content, right, and it excites us. Yeah. Right. In a way that the simple facts that are supposed to be objective and put into a textbook don't. Especially since our modern textbooks everyone has a goal in mind. Like, why would you write a textbook without a goal? Why would you teach a class without a goal? In our modern mind, the goal is to make someone who can make money, right? Is to form someone for a career, to fit him into the economic wheel, to be a clog. There's a great book by Charles Dickens called Hard Times. I don't know if you've read that. Dickens is great, period, just as a man who teaches what character is and virtue, and he's very classically read. But in hard times, the teacher is all about facts, right? So get the facts into these kids so that they can be workers, and they can be, they can be participants in the economy. Right?
They can help serve the nation to some degree, right? If they're efficient workers, then they help the nation move forward.
Yeah. But it's all about giving them facts, and it's not about forming their character. It's not about forming their imagination. It's not about forming them as whole people, right? Mm-hmm. That's what this sort of like monster teacher is. It just teaches facts, and that's all that matters. Mm-hmm. And it shows just the total misery and just how people are lost, right? They're lost. If all of my learning, all of my zeal, you said 40 hours a week. Think about that. 40 hours a week in school. Lord have mercy. Mm-hmm. And it's all geared toward one ultimate goal, and that is to make money. Well, then what am I here for?
Mm-hmm. What are you going to do with that money?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to teach facts without moral instruction, to teach information without moral development, and also, frankly, God, right? Your creator is silly. Mm-hmm. And you will not, this is the beauty about going to the primary sources, Latin, Greek, Roman Greek, and then all the way through the Western tradition. You will not find instruction without mention of God, and without mention of character, and without mention of morality. I think part of the reason we moved away from the actual sources is because the modern man, right, after the Enlightenment, doesn't think you as a human being should be listening to any talk about God, right? Or how church and state may interact, right? So they're going to filter the information to you as an economic man, right? Because this is all that matters.
Why does that shift take place, do you think?
Why does that shift take place? Well, because the Enlightenment actually did things, right? It changed the mind of man. People decided that what mattered was it's not just the Enlightenment, right? So
what's the time period for the Enlightenment? Just for people that are maybe they're not sure what the Enlightenment is.
The peak of the Enlightenment, or is the 17th century. Mm-hmm. The 18th century. So if you're 1700s, 18th century. So if you're thinking of guys like Voltaire or Diderot, or if you're thinking about Rousseau, guys like that.
These are these philosophical thinkers.
Yeah, philosophical thinkers, but also they're writing plays, they're writing literature. They're the philosophes, they're the wise men of the age, and they're particularly anti-Christian. They might not be anti-God, but they're anti-Christian.
Why do you think that is? Why is Christianity a domino that has to be knocked over for the things that they're striving after?
Because Christianity began to be considered stupid and authoritative. Stupid in the sense that it doesn't accord with reason as far as all these miracles, supernatural revelations, and also offensive in the sense of you're a sinner and your sin deserves the wrath of God. This is extremely offensive to people who thought that you were born generally good, right? You had this great potential, which is the dominant thinking of who man was, because they're always thinking about potential. We're gonna usher in a utopia, right? Here on earth, we can have peace on earth. If only we get rid of these religious ideas that keep us down. So that's why it was considered stupid, right? Also, though, it was considered bad for like intellectual growth and progress. What you see a lot of is the idea that Christian morality, and this really springs forth in the 19th century, very, very just pointedly with Friedrich Nietzsche, But Christian morality keeps people down, right? And Marx, of course, is a child of the Enlightenment in this way too. That the Christian structures are there to keep people down, right? So to keep a wife submissive to her husband, right? So she can't go and do what she really wants, which is to work in the workforce. And Marx just asserts that, and for 150 years we've believed it. 170 years we've believed it and simply lived that way.
Now that's where true happiness is.
Yeah, that's where your true happiness is.
He didn't make an argument for it. He asserted it, and we bought it.
Yeah,
and it made that part of our ethos.
This is just happiness. Yeah. It's not happiness for me. But my wife's pretty happy. She's been in the workforce a little bit, but her happiness is in being a wife and a mother and taking care of a home, right? And the fact is, though, is that the Christianity was looked at as an oppressive religion, not just for women, but also for workers. What does God tell us in the Bible? Work hard, right? Obey your masters. So was this used to keep people down? Of course it was, right? But here's another ancient maxim, right? Abusus non tollit usum, right? So the abuse does not take away the proper use of something. Every good thing can be abused. Look at alcohol. Yeah. It's like one of the most wonderful things God could possibly have given us, right? And what do people do with it? They abuse it. Yeah. And yet that does not make it bad for me to drink a glass of wine. So you have this in literature, in philosophy, all over the place, in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, a criticism and a deconstruction of what the West gave us, all of its values, and especially a presentation of it as stupid and oppressive. So even if you take literature like Henrik Ibsen, he wrote Doll House, he wrote a whole bunch of plays. He was a dramatist from Scandinavia, very famous. His plays were performed all over in America. And he's the turn of the 19th, 20th century, right? And he criticizes how women are being treated as just like this kind of educated housewife who has nothing to do at all, right? And there's a problem there that he puts his finger on, right? And yet, he doesn't give you any solutions. Like, what's the solution? So she's sad. She has no reason to live. She doesn't really like her husband. And she has nothing to do. And her life is boring. What's the solution? Is the solution that we put her in a factory? Right. Is the solution that she become a CEO? Right? What is the solution? Because you have to offer that. And the fact is, Christianity and the Western tradition has always offered the solution to this. And that's husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands, right? And it gives you a reason for living that says the home is actually the most important place that God institutes. The church, right? There's always stuff to do at church. And you're always a citizen and you're always a neighbor. And there are a million good works. Every time you wake up in the morning, you should be excited to go and do those good works, right? Yeah. Christianity gives you the answer to all this humdrum, boring, horrible oppression that could happen within the Christian system, right? Yeah. What does Chesterton say? He says, every job is meant to serve the mother. The reason you have police officers, the reason you have businessmen and all of this is so that the mother can do her job of raising the children. That's the whole purpose of an economy, of a nation, of all of these things, is a household where you can raise the offspring in a good and healthy way. Right. So your point being, these are good estates. Do they get abused? Yes. And certainly at this Enlightenment time with some of these examples, they're looking at the abuses and they're saying these abuses are bad and therefore burn it down and walk away. Correct. Or leave it in the past. We've got to progress and change and leave all of these institutions behind. Christianity, including some of these Western traditions and the educational system that's grown up within it. So now you're going to see these drastic changes that are going to affect the way that we form children, that we form men and we form women. Yeah. Yeah. And so what most Enlightenment philosophers wanted to do was first get rid of Christianity because it's oppressive and it's stupid. Okay? The intellectual man can no longer believe in all these miracles. We don't want to believe in a God who's wrathful and who slays his son in order to pay for the sins of his sinful creation. We can't, but we are enlightened men. We don't believe in this stuff. This is fairy tale stuff, right? So let's move beyond that. But they did want, most of them, especially in the first generations, to hold on to a natural law, a morality, and the idea of a God, right? So this is where deism becomes very popular, where you have a God who sets down a moral order, but otherwise isn't too interested in what you do day by day, right? And he certainly did not send his son to die for you, right? So, and he doesn't interfere, right? He only works through the natural causes, right? So now you've got a God and you've got a moral code. The problem is, though, that despite their best efforts, the moral code fell apart, and so did the conception of this God, because you can't define him. Where do you get this natural law? And why should we obey it? Yeah, it says who, right? So that's the other. They wanted to get away from the authority of Scripture and the authority of the church, which obviously the authority of the church had been abused, right? The Pope making claims he had no business making. Even the Roman Catholics would admit that now, right? But once again, abusus non tollit usum, right? Once you get away from the authority of Scripture, once you get the authority away from the authority of a sacred text and a sacred realm to life, and instead act like you can in some secularist way, have a conception of God and a morality, everything breaks apart. It might last for a couple generations where you can sort of live as parasites of Christian virtue, right? But eventually the parasites just eat up their host and they have nothing to live on. Yeah. Right? And that's why in the 19th century, people like Marx and Freud, Darwin, right? They stand up, and in particular, and Nietzsche, right? They stand up and say, enough with it, right? There is no Christian morality. The only morality there is what we create, right? And for Freud, the goal was sexual pleasure. That's simply the goal of life. For Marx, it was to be in control of your own economic self, right? So in other words, to have a good career and to be independent from the boss man. Right?
Self-sufficiency or power.
Yeah.
That was good.
But having to do with money, right? Because that's right. Very, yeah. So money, sexual pleasure, those are the two goals. And then Nietzsche at the end of the 19th century just stands up. He's the one who says God is dead, right? So we all know this is what he says. So let's start acting like it. We need to start our own morality. And all of these morals that you've been holding to, they can't hold anymore, right? You needed a sacred text for that. The sacred text is gone. You've already rejected it. Don't act like you can have a moral code anymore. And that's exactly how we've lived ever since, right? And when I say we, I mean, this has been the trend of Western society, the assumption of Western society that we live for money, we live for sexual pleasure. And that's just simply become more and more accepted without even thinking about it.
Wasn't it true that, I've heard it said before, it starts with the philosophers, and then it moves to the universities, and then it moves to the 12-year-old at the mall, right? So in other words, when Marx and Nietzsche, when they're coming up with these ideas, these are novel and new ideas. So they're bringing these forward, and most people, if the common folk hear that, they say that sounds kind of crazy, right? So they're not going to buy into that right away, but the intellectual groups do. And now you flash forward to today, and almost every kid walking around at the mall is a Marxist, right? And a Nietzschean. Yeah. And they would, if you drilled them on it, they wouldn't even probably know who those people are. But in other words, the ideas that were taught at that point have seeped so into our culture that kids are naturally going to be Marxian, going to be Nietzschean, unless if there's an overt effort on behalf of the parents, on behalf of the church that they're part of, the other community, education, to pull them out of that and towards something that used to be the common way of thinking.
Yes.
Right. Before these movements.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in the air we breathe. So we intuit it.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you're studying it. You don't need to know who Nietzsche is or Freud is or Marx is. You don't have to have studied their their writings in order to think the way they do, right? And you don't even need to self-reflect on how you think and what you think is valuable. That's the scary thing, and most people don't, right? The question is, what do you want out of this life? And when you ask that question, and if it's being answered honestly, and the answer is pleasure, and in particular sexual pleasure, and if the answer is money and position, then it's not only Freud, it's not only Marx, it's the devil, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what is warned against all over in the Bible. This has always been around. However, it's never been so just implanted and entrenched in a society as it is in this society, to the point where sexual education is in our public schools, right? Which just assumes that you're going to do what? Fornicate, right? Before you get married, and that the purpose of sex is recreational.
Yeah.
Well, that's a horrible assumption. It's
Yeah.
absolutely horrible. You're teaching kids this, right? And then also everything is geared toward a career, right? In such a way that God actually has to be excluded, and a particular moral code has to be excluded, right? Because it's religious, right? So again, if you looked at the history of education in America, and just take the last 120 years, so that gets us to 1900, you had Bibles in the classroom in 1900, right? Genesis was taught, right? The Gospels were taught. Children were memorizing Bible verses in our public schools, right? And we've gone from that to, you can't have the Bible in class at all. If you talk about Jesus dying for the sins of the world, then this is somehow unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Separation of church and state, unconstitutional. If you talk about God as creator, you're somehow teaching a religion, and yet you can teach that there is no creator and that we evolved from slime, as if that's not also a religion.
As if that's a self-evident fact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is definitely not.
Definitely not the case.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, right? And so on. You get the thing.
Yeah.
You get the thing. That was a quote from Joe Biden. You didn't get it.
No, I missed that
Yeah.
one. Well,
we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, right? The creator's mentioned there. But when the Honorable President Biden quoted that, he didn't remember it. And so he stumbled over his words. This is during his campaign.
Okay.
And he said,
you know
the rest. Yeah. You know the stuff. Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's a good data point, right? I mean, maybe it was a, mental hiccup or whatnot. There might
He's
be other
not
data
known for
points.
those. I don't think you're correct on that.
But the fact that most people would fall into that camp, right? Like if you start talking with that's not something that comes to mind, right? So your data point about the Bible in the classroom, right? I think when that gets brought up, sometimes people will say, well, that's bad because it's good for people to learn Genesis. And that's good. That's part of the picture. But I think you're saying there's even something deeper going on there, that there's a Bible in the classroom because there's a belief system that holds certain things to be objectively true. And these things are going to be revealed through the scriptures. And this is something that has been going on for this is the Western tradition, right? I mean, you can go back 1,500 years, 1,700 years, where this is kind of standard self-evident truths, right? As given in the Bible. So the fact that this is removed isn't just a tangible, like, well, we don't want the Bible in there because it's going to offend somebody. It's because those truths which have been accepted and which we want children to strive towards, those have been erased, and those are no longer accepted as truths, and those are no longer the educational aims of those schools that the children are attending.
Correct. Yeah, there is no. People act like you can have an education without moral instruction, and no one, upon reflection, could possibly actually think that. Right? When I mentioned Charles Dickens' Hard Times, it's a joke when he's just saying, just facts, 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 facts. So the opening scene is him talking to this young lady and saying, what is a horse? She's like, oh, it's the animal that comes and eats out of my hand when I give it strawberries and, and I love the smell and so forth. And he's like, no, and then of course the fact is that it's 7 feet tall. It's got, it's equiline, so forth and so on. Right. So he just wants these, inert, useless facts without any, talk about how this horse actually fits into the life of a human being. Right. And everyone can see this is a joke. This is horrible. And yet it's happened.
Yeah.
Right. It's happened. However, you can't completely do it. You have to teach some sort of morality. You have to teach some sort of religion. So what Western history since the Enlightenment has taught us is that they tried and they failed to give a Christian morality, what we would consider basically the Ten Commandments, without Christianity. Right? Mm-hmm. Even half of our founding fathers are deists, and they think you can do this. Not confess Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, not confess that the Holy Scriptures are the inerrant true Word of God, right? Not be confessedly Christian, and yet hold on to a Christian morality because it's written, in creation. Mm-hmm. Well, it is written in creation, but you're a sinner, and you will not see it unless God reminds you of it, and He reminds you of it in His Word. So the idea that we're going to have this Christian morality, we're going to have the Ten Commandments, and it's just going to be there without purposeful religious instruction based on the Scriptures. That was the idea for hundreds of years, and it has utterly failed. You remove the Bible, you remove Christianity from the public schools, guess what happens? You replace the morality, and you replace the Creator with some sort of Moloch god, mm-hmm. right? Some sort of Chemosh, who wants you to sacrifice your children to him, right? So the fifth commandment goes out the window, and now abortion is championed. Moses is thrown out the window. Instead, you have Darwin Day, celebrated at our public schools, right? The sixth commandment is thrown out the window. No longer is a husband supposed to love his wife, and a wife supposed to sacrifice or submit to her husband. No longer are they supposed to be faithful to one another. Faithfulness, right? Till death do them part. When this used to be just the great, like the moral fabric of what it meant to be a human being, to be faithful, right? No longer, instead you're taught sex education. You're taught how to put a condom on a banana
in second grade or third or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We could go through these commandments. This no longer you're taught the seventh commandment. Instead, you're taught from a very early age how much money can you make for yourself, right? Instead of being generous with your money, right? And seeing that money is supposed to be for the buildup of what? Your family, your church, and your society, right? So we have replaced what was considered standard morality and what we thought, by we, I mean the Western world, after the Enlightenment, we thought could exist without Christianity, right? And we've lost it. It's been replaced with a new morality, which has 10 commandments based on Marxist and Freudian and Darwinian religion. And we have to realize that when we're talking about the goal of life, we're talking in religious terms. No facts can tell you the goal of life, right?
Yeah.
Right? We're talking about religion. When you're talking about philosophy, you're talking about religion. When anyone tells you this is what you should do, this is how you should live, this is what man is made for, you're talking about religion. When anybody tells you where you came from, you're talking about religion. When anybody tells you, makes a claim about how this all came about, how life came about, we're talking about religion. We have all of these things still in our public schools, and they have replaced the truth, which is Christianity, which answered all of those questions, and did so not only with reason but also with biblical authority.
And what I like about that, I want to ask you a question in a sec, but what I like too is, once again, the original question was about Luther Classical College, right?
Yeah.
And to talk about Luther Classical College, you have to talk about these things, right? Because the reason Luther Classical College is being brought about is because of these serious issues in thinking, in religion, in the aims of what it means to be a human that has seeped into just the regular fabric of thought in, like, as you said earlier, in the air that we breathe. So everyone's experiencing this. And then, of course, if it's there in the culture, and particularly if the educators and the leaders buy into this narrative, then they're going to institutionalize that way of thinking within the education system.
Yes.
And then we're going to get to this here in a little bit, but of course, then you ask the question, well, how much does this seep in? And to what degree? And to what degree did that affect me when I grew up? And to what effect to what degree might that have an effect on my children? And therefore, do I have to respond against that? Because as you talk about all of these things, anyone who's Christian should look at that and say, none of that is what I should believe as a Christian. Those things are antithesis to what we see in the scriptures. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, is it okay for my children to be institutionalized in that way of thinking? And what's my odds of keeping my children Christian if I've got an hour at church and, if you're lucky, maybe 15 minutes of like prayer and devotion at night on a daily basis? If that's what you're doing, but they're being institutionalized in this other way of thinking that you're talking about, these other aims and goals of what it means to be a healthy man
other religion.
Or woman. Yeah, this other religion.
Yep.
What's your chances? And that's a dire thought.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And hence that's going to pitch towards Luther Classical College, which I want to get back to, but I want to ask, how familiar are you with the abolition of man? Because everything you're talking about here, it just rings abolition of man.
I read the Abolition of Man every year.
Yeah.
It's like a ritual for me. I think it's one of the best things ever written, right, on what is the modern crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that we have separated the will, what we desire, from the mind. We have both. The mind knows things, reasons. The will wants things, right? That exists. But you need a heart.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You need a conscience. You need direction, right? And that's what C.S. Lewis talks about in The Abolition of Man, is that we now have men without chests. So the reason doesn't know where to go. It has to be guided, right? Reason has to attach to something, right? And we have people with wills who want all sorts of things, but once again, you need a heart, right? To run that. And in order for that to happen, the whole man has to be instructed in morality, in who he is, his responsibilities as a created being, and his responsibilities to those around him, and also his goals, not only in this life but in the life to come. Mm-hmm. Right? And you got to fill in that chest somewhere, otherwise you can have total despair. People wanting things but not knowing why they want them. People reasoning things, knowing things, but who cares, right? And what we've seen in the last years is people filling in that cavity, that hole, by saying, you can be whatever you want to be. And maybe that's because, I know you look like a man, but maybe you've always felt that you were a woman, or, acting out by making it so that, homosexuality, the homosexual lifestyle is really what's going to satisfy you as a human being. So you have to fill it in with something. And so the first thing is to rob us of Christian morality. And then the second thing is to fill in something else.
You have a vacuum in order that you can fill it with something else.
And it must be filled in.
Mm-hmm.
It must be filled in. Yeah.
Isn't that where he moves in the third book? Well, I love as you talk about that, men without chests, right? We castrate and bid the gildings be fruitful. Yes. Or we scoff at courage and are shocked to find traitors in our midst, right? It's like you take away that which moves a man towards health. You take that away, then you wonder why everything's falling apart, right? Yeah. But then in that third book or third chapter, I guess, third lecture, then he moves to, it's I think one of the most profound things. It kind of grabs you by your collar, but he says, okay, so once you've removed this kind of overarching, he calls it the Tao, right? Mm-hmm. But it's this kind of overarching narrative, these overarching truths, this objectivity, which all men should submit to, which came out of Christianity as far as you talked about, this infallible word of God that gives us moral instruction, truths about where we came from, truths about where we're going, who God is, how he relates to us. Once you take those away, something ends up having to take its place.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is it's those leaders who have stripped away that which we've inherited from Christianity, from the West. And then they have to come up with, as you said, they have to fill it with something. So those conditioners end up setting up their own understanding of morality,
Mm-hmm.
what the purpose of life is, what you should strive for. And then they have to feed that into the people,
Mm-hmm.
But then in his final movement, he basically says, well, where are these conditioners getting their ideas? And he basically says, well, if they're not ruled by God, they have to be ruled by Satan. And basically you have Satan ruling these conditioners who are then ruling the people. So who's ultimately in charge as we shed God as our God? Well, you end up doing, like, as you said, you end up worshiping Molech, right? You end up doing what the pagans did. You end up submitting to Satan as you remove God away. And it's just, he brings the whole thing to completion, and it's like an hour read, right? It's not a long read, but he succinctly is saying, and he says, this is the most important book I've ever written. And he's written Mere Christianity, The Space Trail, all of these wonderful books. And he says, this is the most important because he sees this as the abolition of man, right? This is what's destroying what it means to be a man made in God's image. And it has everything to do with what's going on in the educational system and in the thought process of the West as they've tried to shed their Christian values.
Yeah, exactly. And we should know that it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy, that this was purposeful. There's something called the Frankfurt School. They came out of Germany. They had to leave Germany because they were basically communists, avowed communists, and Hitler did not like communists. Hitler was a very bad man, but he didn't like the communists. In fact, he ended up fighting Russia, right? Mm-hmm. He liked National Socialism, right? So he wanted them gone. Well, anyway, a number of them fled to the United States, but their stated goal, and it's not hidden at all, their stated goal was to take over the universities. And they've done a very good job of doing it, to fill our universities, and in particular, our education departments at our universities with Marxist and Freudian ideals. And that's why you see the dawn of sexual education and purposefully teaching children to sexualize them far before they're ready for it. Mm-hmm. As if anyone, by the way, it's so creepy, huh? Anyone except for a mom and dad, or maybe a pastor, should be telling these kids about these very intimate things, mm-hmm. right? But they purposely wanted to sexualize our children, and then also to make it very, very clear that the goal of life is career, right? Is money. Mm-hmm. Not that career and money aren't important aspects of life. He who does not provide for his own family is worse than an unbeliever. However, education is, as we've been discussing this entire time, meant to form the entire man, and should be specifically Christian and specifically moral. So this was a conspiracy. They have accomplished it. And if you're talking about, that's just a snapshot of history, of what actually happened. If you're talking about the takeover of our universities, of all this woke stuff and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the hypersexualization of education and gender theory and so forth and so on, right? All of these things were planned long before, not just by the devil, but in the minds of people who wanted to bring it down to the lowest levels. Just as you said, starts with the philosophers, goes to the universities, comes to the 12-year-old. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing today too. It surprised me. It shouldn't have surprised me, but I listened to NPR because faz esta posto docere. It's good to be taught by the enemy. And I'm listening to a rerun of this show with what's her face? I forget her name. That's fine. But she does the interviews on NPR, and she is interviewing in the 1980s transgender activist. 1980s.
80s.
Yeah. Might have been 1990s, but I'm pretty sure it was 1980s. Either way, you're talking 30 years before it was actually accepted, right? Because transgenderism has been accepted for how many months? I mean, we can literally...
Yeah. We just watched that transition take place.
Yeah. Literally, the last 36 months, last 48 months, something like that, right? We can count it in months. But NPR was on top of that 30 or 40 years ago, right? And aired it too. So things take a while to seep down, but don't. There's a lot of talk about conspiracy theory, and yeah, some things are conspiracy theories. I'm pretty sure the Earth is a globe, right? But not to offend any flat earthers out there, but I'm pretty sure it's a globe. But some things are conspiracy theories. However, some things are just conspiracies.
Which basically means there's a group of individuals who have some sense of power and control, and they make a plan to implement something, and they're overt about it, and they strategize as if you're playing chess, right? That's what a conspiracy is.
Yeah.
So,
and the goal is to secularize America, get rid of Christianity, get rid of any of its moral structure, and they will do so in any way they can. And once you can step into the way they think, you realize that changing from a man to a woman and a woman to a man, that's wonderful for them. It's just total denier of the creator, right? And then you say, yeah, but even natural law would tell you that a man has an XY chromosome, woman has XX chromosome. Even natural law would tell you that, and they say, what natural law? What are you talking about? Who do you think came up with the idea of natural law? Christians, right? Right? So C.S. Lewis can talk about his Tao all he wants. The only reason he has a Tao is because people were conditioned to believe in a Tao. We're conditioned to believe in the Ten Commandments. We're conditioned to believe in a moral code. Well, we are going to create a new moral code, and there's no reason we can't do it because we are our own creators, right? This is simply the way they think, and they think the way you think is totally oppressive.
And the way that you're going to have progress is you can't just convince a couple people. You have to get everybody on board with this, and you have to squash and you have to kill and crucify Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah, it must die. It's widely recognized amongst the liberal progressive movements that want to destroy Christianity that the non-traditional Christian groups are not much of a threat because they've already secularized enough, right? They've already brought in the rock music. They've already, accepted, if they're more liberal churches, they've accepted homosexual marriage, things like that. But the degree to which they've accepted like the culture, right, in one way or another, is the degree to which the progressives are not too worried about them because they figure, we've got our tentacles in there. It's people like us who have traditional worship, who still actually not only believe but act like it's normal to have, children and to have devotion around the table and to sing hymns written in the 16th century and do it with gusto, right? We're the real threat, and they know it, and they'll say it out loud, right? Which is a beautiful thing, because this is what Jesus says: "Blessed are you when you are persecuted, when men say all sorts of evil things about you falsely for my name's sake. Blessed are you," right? Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven.
I've heard it said, I think it's so true, is that if you as a Christian are supported by most of your friends and colleagues and everyone in the secular world, if they're all just kind of, oh yeah, he's dead, that's probably a pretty good sign, right? That you're maybe not as thoroughly Christian as you should be, or wearing it on your, like that's a danger. You should have pushback in different areas of your life. If you're not, then you're not standing aside from culture, and you're probably not standing for, as you mentioned, these are two completely clashing and different ideologies.
Yes.
And if you're a Christian, you're firmly in one camp, and therefore you're going to become the enemy of this secular camp.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to try, right?
Yeah,
right.
Don't go seek martyrdom.
Yeah. We don't want to have a martyr complex, and we don't want to, be a jerk for no reason.
Right.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have to try. That's the point. This should come naturally, where you're living the Christian life, and then somebody just totally mocks you and says, so for example, I bought a cigar a few years ago for Easter, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to smoke a cigar after all the Easter services and so forth.
And look out at your mountain.
And look at my mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I did. It was a beautiful thing. And the cigar seller was like, "Oh, you don't come in here too often anymore." I'm like, "No, yeah, I quit cigars. But I have one on special occasions. So I'm just smoking a cigar for Easter." And he says, oh, that's the zombie holiday. Right? So all I had to do is say I'm smoking a cigar for Easter, which you wouldn't think is a great Christian confession. And he says that's the zombie holiday because it's this guy, right, who comes up from the dead and right, so forth.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, you don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus?" And he's like, "Well, I'm just saying, it's just kind of funny that you guys would." No, well, he's not dead. He's alive, right? That's the whole point. Right?
Yeah.
And he was seen alive by like 500 people at the same time. Right? So I basically preached to him my Easter sermon.
Yeah.
Right? But the point is, once you get into an anti-Christian culture, it's you using words like Easter are going to get you into trouble nowadays, or like clashes. I should say. This wasn't too much trouble, right? He still sold me the cigar.
Yeah.
Right. And it was an opportunity to confess the Lord Jesus. But this is the world we live in. It's going to be constant clashes. And you shouldn't have to try, right? Just be faithful. Mm-hmm. John Gerhardt has a beautiful quote where he says that if your own conscience, God, that is the Bible, and a couple pious men exonerate you, that's all you need. Mm-hmm. In other words, you're never going to stand alone, right? So you're not going to want all sorts of, your secular friends and all of society saying, "Yeah, good job," right? Because that's a sign that you've compromised. Mm-hmm. However, you're always going to have your own conscience, God, because your conscience should be formed by God, right? And His clear word, and a couple pious people, right? Faithful Christians who are going to say, "No, you've done the right thing," right? And we need that too.
Doesn't that give such peace too? Especially the last couple of years, we've Josh and I, we've done a couple of different things. We've got kind of a Christian fraternity group of men or whatnot, and we just kind of talk through different things, do different disciplines and such. But there's always most things are black and white, but there's always some areas where you're like, am I navigating this right? Like, is this morally sound? Those kind of things. Maybe something like a cigar would fall into that, where certainly no one's going to think like a cigar on Easter is a big deal. But if you're like, I'm doing a cigar once a week, like, is this becoming an issue? You just get into those gray areas. And it's so nice to be able to lean on the community, which is the design of the church, right? And to be able to talk those things through. And it just gives you good clarity on, if I'm working through something, I'm trying to figure out what's the right way of going about it. I've got extra eyes on me, right? Like you said, I've got conscious, I've got the Bible, and I've got God, I've got the church that stands there, but I've got this also community of people I trust that believe what I believe. And it's just able to help kind of root you in, I'm feeling confident in the decisions I'm making because other eyes are looking at this.
And that, by the way, with Luther Classical, that we actually have a college that is all Lutheran. So Lutheran professors, all Lutheran student body, where you have that community constantly present and ingrained, sort of will set a foundation for the future for these students, that you're supposed to be seeking this same community out, because the world out there, right, you're going to get all sorts of pushback, all sorts of persecution, and you need not just your Bible and not just your own conscience. You're not a monk, right? But you need your church community, and faithful Christian friends. This is why in the Apostles' Creed, it's really beautiful that we say, "I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Christian Church, the communion of saints," right? We need the communion of saints. We need the mutual conversation and consolation of the brethren. We need faithful faithful Christians in our lives. And that does not mean that we have to sequester ourselves off. We have to live in the world. But it does mean that you do not want to go it alone in this world. And you don't have to. That's part of the reason God made his church. Yeah. Christ instituted his church. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. He doesn't say we're one.
Yeah. 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 So you mentioned Luther College. Let's jump back to Luther College. I do want to dive into a little bit, but let's do Luther College here. So we've painted, and there's a little bit more to paint too, and we'll see where we're at in time and whatnot. Maybe we go back to it. But so there's these moving ideologies that have taken place that are, we can say, overtly against Christianity. These things have been conspiratorially, they've been instituted into our educational system. So therefore, our educational system has very much shifted, and we can get into some of the details of that, history, social studies, all these different kind of things. Christians don't want that. You shouldn't want that. You should be up in arms against that, because what a horrific attack on your children, that you're exposing them to. And I'm not trying to put blame, but that's really dangerous. So that leads to educational reform or return, within Christian circles, really good. And that's going to lead to then this idea of Luther Classical College. So this movement, this need is identified, it's recognized, it's desired in a grand way. And now you're sitting here, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and you're starting to lay the foundation. What is that? What are those conversations look like? What are the steps?
Yeah. So it was 2020 when the idea first became solid. We're going to do this. I was actually coming back from vacation, which I just came back from last night. And we listen to books when we're coming back, if the children will allow it. The older children love it, and we listened to Anthony Esselin's Out of the Ashes.
Oh, yes.
And that was we were already thinking about it, but then hearing Anthony Esselin basically say, you need to build something out of the ashes, so just do it, was a shot in the arm. And so I began the calling process, just calling all these guys who are interested in starting the college, forming the board of regents, and then we started the magazine at the same time, Christian Culture.
Why did you think this was so essential to do right off the bat?
Because we needed to reach as many people as possible to let people know we're starting this college and this is what it's going to be about.
It's not just an institute; it is an institution, but it's an idea, and here's what that idea
looks
like.
Yeah. So, and we presented basically the idea of the college by presenting good content in the magazine at the same time as we're saying, "Hey, let's start this college." And it was the reaction was immediately, wonderful, thank you, right? We've wanted this for our children. And again, from all over the country. And so we formed our board of regents. We got a couple of lawyers on there. We had some help from the LCEF and their lawyers to submit a 501c3 application and to get legal with the state and all that stuff. And then the big thing was setting up the structure of this college. And that's been 2 years of constant work. Setting up what the curriculum is going to look like exactly. We're going to have the full academic handbook released this January, but it's been a process of 2 years in the making. We actually contacted some 36 professors and experts in their fields to say, hey, what would you want? We're talking about 1 degree, right? So this isn't a major in history or a major in political science. We're talking 1 degree. What does someone need to know? And give us primary sources. Give us the curriculum for your area. And so we had mathematicians tell us, scientists tell us, theologians tell us, philosophers tell us, historians tell us, literature, so forth and so on. And we got all of these expert feedbacks, and then we had responses and so forth to form the curriculum that was absolutely sort of essential. what everyone should be learning in our dream college, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're making the dream a reality. And so our curriculum then was fine-tuned, and it's every curriculum meeting I went to, I have to go to all these committee meetings, right? Because it's not just a curriculum. You got to have students, right? You got to have admissions meetings. You have to have, obviously, raising money meetings and so forth and so on. But every one of the other meetings, sometimes I come back a little depressed, like, oh man, there's a lot of work to be done. The curriculum meetings, always like, this is what they're learning. This is what we're going to give them. I want to go to this college.
Yeah.
Right? My wife is like, can I go to Luther Classical College? Like, no, they said there's too much competition. You won't make it in. But not that she could make it in, but you get the point. She's not serious. So I don't want to throw my wife under the bus. But the point is that some of the formation of this college has just been absolutely delightful. And we've brought in so many like experts and advice and so forth. We've been talking to presidents and faculty of our different Concordias, other colleges that are similar to ours but are of different denominations. So, for example, here in Wyoming, you have Wyoming Catholic College. Wyoming Catholic College gets something like 800 applicants a year and lets in maybe 80, 100, right? From all over the country, from all over the world, right? They have one degree. That's exactly what we're doing. And so we got all sorts of advice from them, talked to their admissions and their development guys. Also New St. Andrews up in Moscow, Idaho. Again, just one degree. So they're not trying to do all these majors, which makes it really expensive, but one degree. And we're asking, their help from their CFO, the chief financial officer, a lot of their policies and so forth, so that we don't have to make things up from whole cloth. We've been getting experts' opinions on just about every step of the way, and probably it's the greatest hire we could have possibly made. I should say appointment is Dr. Ryan McPherson, who's been brought on as our academic dean. Mm-hmm. And he is such a powerful mind, such an organizational mind, and so committed to the mission and so faithful to God that he is a literal godsend to us. And him kind of bringing together everything that we've done to this point and organizing it has just been a wonderful thing to see. And it's been just a month. Today is September 1st. So
since he started.
Yep.
Yeah.
Full time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we're going to have him on the show too. He's got some good talking points.
Yeah. He's remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah. All you have to do is listen to him talk and you'll be convinced. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't have
I'll eat lunch and just let him go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've hinted at this already, but Luther Classical College also is going to be inexpensive. We're charging $8,500 for tuition.
You said $8,500?
$8,500, yeah, $8,500.
Wow,
for a year.
That's less than the Lutheran High School in our area.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're going to be able to do it for two reasons. One is because we are only having one major, and so it's a classical liberal arts education, and that means 80% of what is 80% is a core curriculum that all students take. You can minor in something. We call them tracks. So if you wanted to do your other 20% in music, then it'd be a parish music track. If you wanted to do it in languages, it would be a pre-seminary or biblical languages track. If you wanted to do it in education, then it'd be a classical education track. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to just take whatever you want, right? Take more history classes, right? Then it would just be that classical liberal arts degree. But it's only one degree. And what that means is that we can do this whole thing with 12 full-time professors plus our president and our academic dean. Right?
So the overhead's so small, which is what allows.
Exactly. Tiny amount of staff. In the last, I think, 20 years, the staff at the average university has grown by 80%, whereas the student population hasn't grown much or at all.
So who's going to pay for that?
Who's going to pay for it? Tuition pays for it.
Yeah.
Right. And so you've seen, I think when I went to Bethany Lutheran College, it was $16,000. And I think
That's about what I paid you.
And I think
not at Bethany. I went to Ball State.
Yeah. But I think it's 30 now. Right. So, that's what 20 years difference makes. Right. Mm-hmm. And the more majors you have, the more staff you need. And a lot of these majors, where you're going to specialize in communications, you're going to specialize in business. The fact is that a guy who is well-educated, well-rounded, capable, good at thinking, respectful, creative, which is what a classical education is going to give you, is going to be the kind of guy who can work in your business.
Yeah.
I talk to business owners and they're like, man, I mean, some of these business degrees, business graduates are great, but I prefer to get someone with a philosophy degree or a history degree or just a liberal arts degree.
100%.
Because they actually know how to think.
Yeah.
Right?
I had a business and psychology degree. So before I went to seminary, I worked out in the workforce, and 90% of my colleagues, unless you did like accounting or finance and you got you worked as an accountant for a big five firm, something like that. Every other job, you're basically doing some form of sales. And the whole point is prove yourself for 2 years. And if you stand out, then you'll move up and then you'll get those jobs, which is the job that every person going to the business program their freshman year of college has in their mind. Like, you're not going to do that. You got to go prove yourself. Mm-hmm. They don't really care about your marketing degree. That might get you in the door, but what they really care about is, do you have good communication skills?
Yep.
Can you think through? Can you problem solve? Are you a go-getter?
Yep.
All of these type of things. Dale Carnegie talked about this years ago, right? He said communication is going to be 80% of the success that you have in life and in your career.
Yep.
And this is where you're advocating and you're saying, why one degree? You're saying because we're going to form, am I right, a well-formed man and a well-formed woman that if you want to go into business, yeah, you can do it and you'll do way better than the marketing degree individuals.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Yep.
So is that why? So why one degree? Is that it? What else is there? Because that's probably the biggest shock for someone listening to this and saying, one degree?
Yeah, because they're worried about career.
Yeah.
Right? And I understand being worried about career, but you have to check yourself on that, right? Mm-hmm. And say, wait. It's more than career. We know that. We're Christians, right? Mm-hmm. Education is not simply about career. That is not the reason that we have conceived of education for 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 6,000 years of human history. It is not just to be able to get you to make money. Okay, that is a modern thought, and we have to root it out of our minds, right? Mm-hmm. Education is to form the whole man, the whole woman, right? However, when you're thinking about a career, and I understand that is a consideration, it has to be, because it is part of a man. You should not think that a business degree means a job in business, and a marketing degree means a job in marketing, and a communications degree means a job in communication. An underwater basket weaving degree gives you a job in underwater basket weaving, which, by the way, doesn't exist, right? Majors don't necessarily convert into actual jobs. Rather, you have medical schools hanging out at Hillsdale College looking at their philosophy degrees, right? Saying, we want those guys because they're going to do really good in medical school. Same thing with law school, right? You don't need a pre-law degree. That's ridiculous. You just have to take an LSAT, right? And if you are well-rounded, well-educated, and can think clearly, and can read well and can communicate well because you've taken rhetoric classes and so forth, and read the best of all literature, right? And heard the best preaching and read the best sermons, all those things. Then you can do all of these different jobs. And if you look at the statistics, right, if we want just facts, philosophy majors, so a liberal arts major, right, ends up making more than just about any other major.
Really?
Yeah. Unless you're talking about like engineering, right?
Right, yeah.
And where it comes to like engineering and stuff, yeah, we can't offer that.
That's a whole other...
Yeah. So this college won't be for everybody. We can't do an engineering degree. What we can do is give you your first 2 years and send you off to an engineering degree, right? We can do that with basically any degree. But people should get it out of their minds that you need like a pre-med degree in order to go to med school. Not true. Pre-law degree in order to go to... No. Okay. Most of these majors can be thrown out And all they end up doing is over-specializing you and robbing you of classes that you should be taking to make you a more rounded, educated individual, right? And then costing a whole bunch of money and raising tuition. So we can keep it to 8,500 because we have that one major. The other thing that keeps us at 8,500 is the support that we're getting. We have hundreds and hundreds of individuals supporting us on a monthly basis, right? So every month something comes out of their checking account or whatever. And our plan is, of course, and our prayer is to grow that as more and more people hear about this. And it's a huge thing when someone just signs up for $10 on our website or $15 a month, which is what? A couple coffees, right? A foo-foo drink, right? A month. And then you get 1,000 of those, and wow, that translates into some real money. But that individual support has been huge. And then, so we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars already that's coming in annually just from those individual supporters. And then also from congregations. So we have, I don't know what the number is at this date, over 140 congregations that are supporting us as their mission. You think about that, 140. I think there are like 60 congregations in Wyoming total.
Yeah.
Right? Not 60 congregations supporting us, but total. Yeah. Right? So 140 is horrible at math. No, that's over twice as much, right?
Yeah.
Than an entire district supporting this congregation. So
and it hasn't even opened yet, right? So I mean, it's still
we haven't even
opened
yet. We don't have any students yet.
My guess is most people watching this is probably the first time they've heard of Luther Classical College.
Wow.
Maybe not, but
I hope not. But yeah, we had to do a better job of marketing, getting the name out.
But at least some exposure, should be growing from this.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And the idea is that the more people know about it, the more people are going to be excited about it. Mm-hmm. And frankly, what I want is not just Luther Classical College in Casper, Wyoming, but for us to have several of these throughout the country, because it's exactly what we need. The president of Concordia, Nebraska, Bernard Bull, he gave a very interesting talk at Symposia in Fort Wayne last year, where he talked about basically the future of higher education in Lutheranism. And part of that, his conclusion was that you're going to need what he called critical mass schools, and that is majority Lutheran schools, majority professors Lutheran, and yet you have more majors, and you have people who come in who aren't all Lutheran, and yet you keep true to the Lutheran mission, mm-hmm. right? Because if you don't keep true to the Lutheran mission, you're going to fail, mm-hmm. or you'll just become a secular university that is, why would I send my kid to that?
Right.
I'd spend less money and go to University of Wyoming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So critical mass, which is what Concordia, Nebraska is right now. It's majority Lutheran and undergraduate students and majority Lutheran and professors. And Dr. Bull's plan is to make it more and more Lutheran, right? And wonderful. That's fantastic. I completely agree. And they can offer something like nursing, right, that we're not going to be able to offer. So they're going to be able to offer some of those majors that are actually important and that we wouldn't be able to offer. I think they have a pre-engineering degree or something like that.
Okay.
But then you said the other school going forward that we're going to need are schools like Luther Classical College that are completely Lutheran and inexpensive and focused in on one major. And so his assessment of the university scene is that we're going to need critical mass schools like Concordia Seward, mostly Lutheran with a Lutheran identity, and schools like Luther Classical College, not just one, but probably several. So looking into the future, I think that's what we are going to see. Mm-hmm. We're going to see the Concordias, at least 2 or 3 of them, God willing. God be praised if it would be all 5 of them at this point, but get more and more and more Lutheran. And hopefully work on bringing tuition down, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll have those critical mass schools with more majors, but then also you have this blessed alternative, which is a college like Luther Classical College that's all Lutheran, that's smaller, that's one major, and that's classical.
So I can see, very easily with my kids, I can see this being very attractive from parents' standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, just you can understand the mission of the school and how it affects individual children, right? How it affects my son Lincoln, right? Like that's a personal story so for someone giving money, it's, hey, you're helping Lincoln get this kind of education that we've been talking about, which forms him in the way contra the world, right?
Yeah.
Which is very, very, it's obviously a necessity. How do you see this college, or if it gives birth to other colleges as well, how does that change even the structure and the format on a macro scale with the LCMS, with the Lutheran Church, with Christianity, and with our country? Like, can you see macro movements? In other words, for someone who's giving money to this, it helps the individual student. But is this a macro mission of the church?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I don't know if there's a single institution that will have more effect than Luther Classical College and, God willing, more colleges like it. And I'll tell you why for a couple of reasons. Well, I'll probably do three. One is that you do not have the encouragement, the doctrinal teaching about family and how important it is in other institutions, colleges, and so forth. That it is a noble thing to be a father, a noble thing to be a mother, and to accept God's rich blessings of children and to raise them in the Christian faith. And that as a mother and father, honoring marriage and honoring the family, raising those kids in the Christian faith is the great priority of your life, right? Mm-hmm. That is not something that is like taught in every single classroom and every single class and so forth, no matter what you're learning about: science, math, music, history, communication, whatever, right? It will be here. And to have student after student, couple after couple, married couple after married couple, go out into our LCMS churches with that kind of mindset, of course, is game changing. Mm-hmm. You say, oh, well, only 300 students. We're going to cap it at 300 students. Yeah. This is exponential growth, actually, right? Mm-hmm. Just think about it. Look, read Numbers or read First Chronicles. It's very boring, the first 6 chapters. God forgive me for saying that the Bible is boring, but the first 6, 7 chapters. But what you do see is exponential growth in these families, right? Mm-hmm. And as long as you just have to be faithful, right? And focus on the home. So that's the one thing, is that we want to reinvigorate, get people excited about family, living the Lutheran life, living the congregational life. Mm-hmm. So when they leave this home or leave this college, they're excited to start their own home in their own congregation throughout the United States.
We'll just put some numbers on that, because my mind immediately went to numbers as you were doing that. So if you got 300 kids, now if they get married, you could double this, right? You could say, okay, well, they go off, if they all get married outside of the college, 600, but let's just say 300. You've got 300, average of 4 kids, that's 1,200. Do that over the next generation, you've got 5,000. So 1 year of graduates in 2 generations, if they are raising kids in a well-functioning Christian-oriented household that is entrenched with this kind of Christian theology and thinking, in 2 generations, you've got 5,000 kids. And that's every graduating class.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that number goes higher if you've got them marrying people, outside of that college and bringing that into their household as well. So yeah, in 2 generations, 5,000 every year, that's pretty quickly you're going to get to the number of the LCMS.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, just numerically, and that's just one college, right? You're saying if you get 3 or 4, you can change the fabric.
Yeah. So if you want to be, if you want to be all like numbers about this, and like there's something crass about it, right? Mm-hmm. And about trying to be like, hey, we're going to grow the church by having babies and so forth, right? That's not what we're saying. However, this is how God grows his church. I think it's funny when people are like, it's the word, the word, the word. When Luther said that, of course, right? Mm-hmm. But God also uses mommies and daddies who speak the word, right? And he also uses mommies and daddies who help create babies, right? Yeah. That is a synergy right there. We're monergists, but we believe in synergism when it comes to having babies, because it takes a man and a woman. And then you raise them in the Christian faith. God uses families. He uses the estates that he's given. And when you teach people that and get them excited about family and excited about church life, right, it does have its fruit. That's exactly why people are excited about this college. And we will, by God's grace, see that numerical growth when we are faithful.
Yeah.
Right. And if God decides something else, that's up to him. Right. Mm-hmm. But this is the normal way that he grows his church. And by the way, when you have an excited family, right, they talk to their neighbors about it. Mm-hmm. Right. So when we talk about like a college being a mission, a college is a mission of the church in the sense that a congregation is a mission of the church. It's for the faithful. However, what do the faithful do? They go out into the world and they bring people to church. So also other people, the graduates of Luther Classical College will go out into the world, right? They'll live the Christian life. They'll be the salt. They'll be the light, as Jesus tells them to do in Matthew chapter 5. And people will see their good works and glorify their Father who is in heaven. So that's the first thing, is just the general reinvigoration. Higher Things had that slogan, "Dare to be Lutheran," but really, dare to be Lutheran. Live the Lutheran life, live the Lutheran culture. Second is the seminaries need students. They need good students.
Yeah.
They need students, and they need good students.
They don't just need warm bodies, right?
They need
leaders.
Exactly. Exactly. We're heading into more difficult times. We don't need lazy pastors. We don't need pastors with absolutely no ambition, and we don't need unfaithful pastors. We need faithful, ambitious, and hardworking pastors who can lead their congregations with love and with the Word of God. And that's exactly what we want to provide the seminaries. We estimate 15 a year that we'll be sending to, once we hit 2029, we actually have graduates, 15 a year to the seminaries. Right now, each seminary is averaging 40, right? So 15 out of 80. Wow, that's a pretty big number, right? From one little college, right? And we'll see if it's 15, if it's 20, right? And then also when it comes to teachers, there's so many classical Lutheran schools. Basically, every new school that's starting in the LCMS is classical Lutheran, because why would you do anything else besides classical once you've seen what it is, right? Why would you read a textbook of some guy telling you about Caesar and not read Caesar? Makes no sense whatsoever, right? So once you discover classical, you don't go back to what is totally inferior. So
I want to circle back to that too after we kind of get through, like, because that's, I think, important. I really want to kind of hash that out. Look at the Notre Dame study. I don't know if you saw the classical difference. I mean, those
the
numbers
good soil
are,
study.
I don't know how you, once you look at those numbers, there's no turning back.
Yeah, the data's on our side.
Yeah.
And it's also just empirically obvious.
Yeah.
But there is huge need for classical Lutheran teachers, and we would be providing those classical Lutheran teachers. We have a ton of support from CCLE, the Consortium for Classical Lutheran Education, which, by the way, is growing and growing and growing. I think they had 400 or 500 people at their conference this year, and they had to they had to shut the doors, right? More people were wanting to come, right? Classical education is simply the thing, right? It's what people are pursuing in their home schools and in their schools, and we need to provide teachers for them, and capable, again, just like our pastors, capable, good teachers, faithful, ambitious, who love children and love God's word. So those are the three big ones. The general just family. We're not just raising teachers and pastors here, educating pastors and teachers here. We're educating people who are going to end up being plumbers, right? That's one thing I didn't bring up, is that we also are going to be having a trade track.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So where someone can get an AA here, so like a 2-year degree here, and then also get a certificate in, say, plumbing, electrical work, HVAC work, whatever it is, and work with his hands and glorify God that way. But while, you're fixing that toilet, you're singing "Wake Awake, for night is flying," right? Or you're thinking about what Virgil said in the 6th book of the Aeneid, or you're wondering about why the Baptists could possibly think that John chapter 3 isn't talking about baptism, right?
Yeah.
We need plumbers like that. who will make more than I do.
Yeah.
Given what I pay to my plumber, I'm pretty sure that's true. It's like $250 an hour or something.
Yeah, they're doing okay.
God bless them.
They can buy cigars on a weekly basis.
Yeah. So that trade partnership is going to be awesome as well. But so we are about invigorating homes and congregations within our synod. And that happens not just through pastors and teachers. It happens through faithful laymen and faithful lay women leading families. And even if they end up not getting married for one reason or another, being faithful examples of men and women to their congregation. Mm-hmm. Also, they're going to be capable of like singing, reinvigorating choirs.
Yeah.
Right.
If I can give you just a little plug for that. So when I was at SEM, okay, so first year we take our like liturgies class, right? We're learning how to do the liturgy, how to chant, all of that. We had, 40 kids in our class. It was myself and one other individual where I forget, I don't know if it was Dr. Grimer or what, but he comes up and he goes, "Hey, you want some extra? We're going to give you some extra practice." So my voice was it was the bottom two in the class. So, and it was, I just had no training in that. I was kind of an athlete growing up and just never got into that stuff. I just missed out on that. So, I was atrocious. And I'll say since that point, I've just, especially since we've had kids, I'll sing hymns every night with them. And I kid you not, my voice is, it's not, you're not going to come to a concert hall to hear me sing, but like I can hit notes, I can sing the hymns, and in probably 5 or 6 years, or maybe 7 or 8 years or so, but it's become something that I understand now and I can do. And it's an absolute joy. Like it's a legitimate joy.
That's right.
Like it's just, singing hymns with your kids is it's a huge blessing.
Yes. And that's part of the sort of Christian culture that has been mostly lost and needs to be recovered. Mm-hmm. Singing is the most natural thing in the world. You think it's not just because you don't see people doing it, and yet you sing in the shower, right? Yeah. And so it is natural. God made you to be singing beautiful hymns about Him, right? Mm-hmm. To your children. It's actually commanded in the Bible several times. Mm. And so this is one of the things that is lost when all you're looking for is a career and specializing in this or that subject, right? Mm-hmm. No, we need to be educated for the whole man. That includes music also. When people say they can't sing, it's always because they haven't been taught to sing. Mm-hmm. And you, like you said, you might not have like the most beautiful operatic voice or whatever, but you can learn to hit the notes, and you can learn to actually, project a little bit more, mm-hmm. right? When I was growing up, I was tone deaf, and the one choir director just did not work with me. Instead, we were supposed to do "I Am Jesus, Little Lamb," and I was probably like, "I am He's," I have no idea but I was tone deaf, and when you're tone deaf, you simply cannot tell whether it's in tune or not. Mm-hmm. You can't tell what your voice is, right? So I was legitimately tone deaf. I could not understand why people were saying, "No, you can't be in the choir." Yeah, because the whole concept didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand what a tone was. Mm-hmm. No one taught me, and I'd never experienced it myself. So then I went to a public school. We moved. And I was sent to a public school, which for the most part was atrocious. However, there was a woman there. Her name was Miss Tucker, and she was my music teacher. And she was such a wonderful person. And she said, "Well, Christian, why don't you try to sing?" She called it head voice, so falsetto. And I'm like, that's kind of femmy, mm-hmm. Just try it. And so it's like, "I am Jesus." And immediately I knew what it was like to hit a note. And it never had that sensation. I was 13 years old. Never had the sensation of knowing what it meant. I hit a note and I knew it. I could hear it. And from that, I went to singing all the time and singing in tune and singing in parts, and the glorious satisfaction of being able to sing praises to our Creator, right? And that should be taught to every human being.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a potent example of these are things that objectively are part of a healthy and joyful life. And
Yes.
it's not rocket science. These are things that have always been the case.
Yes.
Right? Singing, community, understanding objective truth, loving virtue, despising vice, all of these types of things. And there's nothing more important in your life. I mean, Christianity is the king of this. It's the chief of this, right? But like that's the goal. Like God created you in his image. Like he wants to raise you up and make you healthy, right? To salve, right? So that's the goal. And these are wonderful tools and blessings that God has given to this. These aren't just like hobbies, right?
Yeah.
These are things that are formative to what it means to be a man and a woman who lives a healthy life. And the lacrimosa, the lament is that these things have been taken away. And
Yes.
therefore children and myself, growing up,
Yep.
we're bankrupt of these things.
Yeah.
And
We
it's
were
a
robbed.
tragedy.
Yep.
And Luther College and classical education, and all of these things, these are just returning to those things which are objectively beautiful and good for man and woman to do.
Yes.
And these are necessary not just for your child, but for the church to be healthy, which has just gone through its greatest decline in all of its history in the last 70 years, which just so happens to coincide with us leaving this heritage that we had, right?
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other sort of clarion call of Luther Classical College is that there is nothing to despair of here.
Mm-hmm.
You return to the foundation, and the foundation, the rock, Jesus Christ and his word, which teaches all of the things that we've just been talking about, one way or another. It teaches what a man is, what a woman is, what it means to be created in the image of God. It tells us to sing, right? It tells us to reflect on God's nature. Solomon studied ants, right? And plants. Didn't mean for that to rhyme. But you return to that foundation. You let Christ grow his church.
Mm-hmm.
And he will do it through, again, a return to being faithful to his word, of course, above all, but realizing that being faithful to his word has implications for our home and for our churches and for how we educate, right? And things like this creep up on generations, right? We're not casting blame on people, especially not like when my father and mother raised me in the Christian faith. We sang hymns in our home and so forth. But the public school system turning towards a totally secular religion, right, and being anti-Christian happened largely in my lifetime, right, in the last 40 years. And it wasn't as visible in the previous 40 years. So these things sneak up on people. But now that it's very obvious and in our face, we all just have to admit it and say, we cannot subject our kids to a different religion. And we have to build up, again, the foundation and pursue good classical Christian Lutheran education from childhood to adulthood.
Mm-hmm. Build it out of the ashes, right?
Build out of the ashes.
And thank you for doing it. No, really. So, yeah. I mean, I got to run to the bathroom here in a minute, but I just want to just kind of like one final plug. I mean, Christian culture. So if people want to learn more about Luther Classical College, is Christian culture, is this the best way to go about doing it? Like,
yes, go to our website, subscribe to the magazine, and then also just read through our website. In January, we'll be publishing our academic catalog on there, but there's plenty of stuff on there already, previews of our curriculum and so forth, our strategic plan, things like that. And you can also sign up for Ad Fontes, which means to the sources, and that's kind of like our monthly newsletter. And that's, once again, content filled. It has an essay that has to do with important things.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like Hillsdale's Imprimis.
Yep.
So that's the best way. Go to our website, lutherclassical.org, and or just Google Luther Classical College and you'll get there.
So now I want to look into, you want to look into classical difference?
Oh, absolutely.
So this would be, now we want to talk about classical education. We keep talking about it. It's the bedrock, all of these kind of moving things. But like, what is it? What's the difference? And I think the best, certainly for me, Lewis, Abolition of Man, really started heightening my interest. But the study that came out in 2020, that's what just, it shifted everything. The numbers can grab you by your collar and kind of shake you.
Yeah.
And this study does it. And just to kind of, we're about to look at the numbers, but This is put out by, I forget the institution, but they worked with Notre Dame's sociology department.
Yeah.
And the institution, I don't know if you know the name, but it's basically like that's the cream of the crop when it comes to doing any kind of studies in the educational realm. So Notre Dame's sociology department and whatever the company is that does educational statistical studies, these are the best at figuring out how to take out all of the other kind of metrics. You'd say, well, what about household income?
Exactly.
What about,
Yep.
they take all of these things. In fact, you can get the raw data, and that one, that's through the roof. So they deal with all of that. So the numbers that we're looking at, the experts in the field are taking into account all of the things that you might be thinking in your head, like, well, what about this? What about that? Like that's their job to do this, and they do this, and then they come up with the study. So Ben, I don't know if you can pull it up. It's the good soil. You got it up. All right. So the good soil, a comparative view. So the way they did this study, you could look at a 56-page or 54-page breakdown of this if you really want to like dive into this. But even just up there on the top, and if you can go up and to the right a little bit. So it's a comparative study of 24 to 42-year-old alumni from public, secular, private, Catholic, evangelical, Christian. By the way, most Lutheran schools are going to fall into that category as far as the study. Okay. Religious homeschool, and then ACCS, which is classical Christian schools. And it's on all these different topics and whatnot. So in other words, the way they're doing the study, big sample size. These are individuals aged 24 to 42. They've graduated from these different colleges. It's a good data point of what are they doing now later in life? So in other words, what are the results of this education that they experienced growing up from these very different, points of view, philosophies, all this kind of stuff that we're talking about? How does that play out? Yeah. So if you want to scroll down, you'll get to where you get kind of this list. A little bit further. Okay, so here's one. So the first category they looked at was life outlook. So this is basically going to deal with like, are there problems of depression, or is there kind of optimism? Is mental health a good way to kind of summarize this?
Yeah. Contentment.
Yeah.
With life. So what we would call like basic happiness. Yeah.
Which is something you strive for your kids. Like I want my kids I don't want them struggling with depression. I want them to be just happy, content, joyful.
And even if they're struggling a bit with it, that they can overcome it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That they've got the tools to overcome it.
Yeah.
And are basically happy in life, content, looking forward to the future. Looking forward to heaven also.
Yeah. All right. So if you look at these, the one on the left, if you can see it on the screen, it says, I have so much in life to be thankful for. So here's kind of like an optimism or contentment or hope, could be a word for it. If you look, public's at about 55, prep's at 50, Catholic's at about the same as public. Evangelical is a little bit up at about 62. Homeschool's even a little bit higher than that, than 65. And ACCS is just below 80, about 79. So, I mean, you can the picture is probably the best. You can just see there's one that looks different than the rest of the others. Right?
Sesame Street, right?
Yeah. And then on the right, that one's just huge. But I feel helpless dealing with life's problems. This is basically just you have depression issues.
The inverse.
And there's no difference as you go across between public, prep, Catholic, evangelical, homeschool. No statistical difference. A couple points here or there. They're all right around that 35 to 40 range. You go to ACCS, again, that's classical, and they're below 20. That's statistical significance. That's just, once again, one doesn't look like the others. There's more in this category, but what I just want you to see is just on an overwhelming scale, classical education seems to be affecting people's mental health, as you said, their contentment. Anything else you want to add there on why? Actually, let's circle back and go to the why after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Ben, if you want to go down to the next one, college and career. This one goes back to your point, right? So this would be, are they going to be successful in the educational realm, right? So, a good example would be if they go to Luther Classical College, and then they go to law school, are they going to be better equipped for that, right? This is going to be kind of that category. And if you look here, you can just look at look at the graphs. On the left side, everything's better than public, but they're all kind of in that same category. And then look at the gold line there. It's just, once again, you get a significant difference. Classical's doing better for well prepared for college by their high school, and then earned A's or mostly A's in college. Classical crushes everything else. Homeschool does decent there.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's one thing that I've enjoyed about looking at these graphs is that sometimes actually evangelical schools will outperform homeschool in certain categories.
mm-hmm.
Usually homeschool wins out, I mean, overall. But there are certain things that are like Lutheran schools are doing well already,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the switch to classical shouldn't be as painful as some people think it would be,
mm-hmm.
right? Because if you're already teaching the Bible, you've got the same foundation.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Ben, if you want to go on to the next one. Christian life, this one's huge.
Yes.
Because this is your main goal should be your main goal as a Christian parent, is that I want my child to be thoroughly Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the left, once again, just look at the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Accept authority of church and church leadership, right? This is going to be, people who are probably active participants. Actually, there's another graph that shows this, but active participants in church. Public, prep, Catholic, about the same. You do get a bump from about 35 to about 50 for evangelical and homeschool, which are about the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're up to above 68 for classical, which
mm-hmm.
is a bigger jump from that middle category than the middle was from the lower. On the right, volunteer for organizations that help. So these are they good citizens? And once again, everything's kind of the same. Catholic actually does pretty well there. Classical, once again, just blows it out of the water. Can you go to the right, Bennett? Yeah. It's not there. Okay, you can go back. There's one number in here, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it talks about regular church attendance, and I think it's probably in this category. But it's just, once again, classical. I think it's around 9. Does 90% sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's further down.
Okay, it is further down.
Yep.
Okay. All right, Christian practices.
There it is.
There you go. Look at that. Frequency of religious service. So percent that attend more than 3 times per month. So that's regular. That's pretty much
that's
regular.
every Sunday basically.
Public prep Catholic 33, evangelical homeschool, big jump from there to about 65. So you're basically about double.
Mm-hmm.
And then classical, you're looking at 90%.
Yeah.
So if your kids are going to a classical Christian school, you've got a 90% chance that when they are older, from 24 to 42, that they're going to church 3 times a month. Yeah. Like almost a shoo-in.
Yeah. That's like my number one goal in life.
Yeah. Yeah. That statistic alone is enough for me to say this is huge.
Yeah.
That's what your biggest worry, right? Oh, my kids are going to grow up. They're going to fall in this huge statistic of people that fall away from the church.
Yeah.
Well, if they go to public school, they've got a 33% shot. You can still do that as a parent, but you're working against the odds.
Yep.
Go to classical Christian school, you got 90% chance. If you want to go down to the next one, influencers. Look at that one. So obligation to take action against wrong or injustice. In other words, I can't sit on my hands with the things that are going on in the world. Everything is about 25% and classical is about 45. So just look at that graph. Also, I think it's in this one. It's in the long report. There's a really interesting one where it shows that people that go to classical schools, by far, graphs look similar to this, have the most LGBTQ friends.
Really?
And are not influenced by their beliefs. So at the same time, the same person in both categories will say, I don't buy LGBTQ lifestyle. I don't buy secularism. I don't buy any of that narrative. I don't believe it. Overwhelmingly, they say I don't believe it. And yet they've got the highest number of friends, which means that they're able to differentiate, as you said earlier, like have good Christian friends, but like I can also love these other individuals that are struggling without feeling the need to say, and everything that you're doing is okay.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just like you can be friends with an alcoholic and realize that him going back to the drink is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Which, just as a plug, I mean, Dorothy Sayers writes about this in her, she writes something in education. I forget what it's called, but in this article, she basically says the way you can tell that the education system is unhealthy is by how easily people are marketed to. Sure. Right? They're just, they can't think through these things. They can't, use logic to say, well, no, that sounds like a bad idea. They just see an advertisement. They go, oh, I need to go buy that thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of thing there. It's like, oh, I can't be friends with this person unless if like I think that alcohol, drinking 20 beers is a good thing for them. Right. It's just illogical. And point being, this kind of education is teaching you to think through these things where I can say, yeah, I can love them. And of course I think that idea is dumb, but like you can differentiate those things. That's just healthy thinking and healthy relational individuals.
Yeah. It's once again, outrageously biblical, right? God condemns sin, right? And yet he loves everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. And you must hold these two things in tension, right? When the enemies of the Christian church, of conservative Christianity, which is Christianity, when the enemies of the Christian church say, well, you're hating them. Really? I'm hating an LGBTQ person by pointing out that this is going to hurt them and that they have a creator who loves them very much and who's created them for things that are far greater and that we can help them out of this. That's called love, right? So we have to define what this word means, and we define it according to the Bible and according to who God is, right? It all becomes theology. God is love. And being able to make those distinctions is part of a classical education. That's what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
That God can love this sinner and despise the sin. And Christians are called to do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. There might be no better data point as far as Christians whose minds have kind of been shut off, or have not grown. For those individuals that have to sit there and say, well, if I'm going to love, well, we've got to allow gay pastors into our church, and we've got to do homosexual weddings. Like, even though the Bible strictly says it's wrong, but they can't get out of that category of either loving them means supporting everything that they do, even if it's bad, and hating them means telling them that there might be something wrong in their life.
Yeah.
What an infantile type of a mind.
Yeah.
And it's just.
But you see parents acting this way too, like enabling their children. Well, I love them. Stop giving them money. They're buying drugs, you know? Oh, but I love them. No, there's something called hard love. Our God puts crosses on us. He disciplines us because he loves us, right? So again, you see biblical wisdom that needs to be applied throughout like a school curriculum.
Yeah. All right, I think we've got one or two more here. Conservative and traditional. Just look at the right one here. There are errors in the Bible regarding science or history. Christian Preus, do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I disagree with that statement.
So if you agree with Christian Preus and you disagree that there are errors riddled throughout the Bible, if you go to a public prep or Catholic school, you're sitting just below 40 or 50%. If you're evangelical homeschool, you're sitting around 25, 30%. If you're classical, 15%.
Yeah. That's
evangelical and homeschool are actually doing pretty good there.
Yeah. So once again, that's where you're going to see that evangelical and homeschool will be, decent in some of these categories, much better than public and Catholic, by the way. All you Lutherans sending your kids to Catholic high schools thinking that it's better. In a lot of areas, it's not. And especially since the Roman Catholics teach that there are errors in the Bible regarding science or history. And the Roman Catholics have promoted the theory or doctrine of evolution for a very long time. So,
yeah, they're even worse than the public and prep school there.
Yep.
And once again, prep means a non-Christian prep school.
Yep.
If you want to go down, independent thinkers. This is actually the biggest difference, if I remember correctly. No, sorry, it's the next one. It's the influencers. That's it. Okay, somewhere in there. Well, just if you look at the middle one, science and religion are mostly compatible. I do think that's an important one. And look, just if you look at the graph, classical is above probably about 75, and homeschool is about 55. Everything else is down probably around 45. I think that's really important because we do want good Christian scientists.
Yes.
And Christian science you've never had to use that term before. Christian science, right? Science was Christian thinkers who are exploring God's creation and learning to understand God through what he has made. And all of the great scientific advancements throughout history have been discovered by people who had that kind of mindset. And moving forward, it's going to work in the exact same way. We're in this very weird kind of drop in the market where all of a sudden there's this little surge of scientists that say, well, we don't believe that there's a God and that this is his creation. And I mean, this is the deepest downtrend of what science is actually supposed to be. And classical education is very much helping resurrect that, which I think is very much needed today.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Christian Scientist is also a cult. That's what I think of when I think of it. It's a nice 19th century cult that popped up in America. Gotta love the United States and its cults. But yeah, science and religion are mostly compatible. There's always going to be problems with asking these questions because I could answer yes and no to that, depending on what you mean by science. So like the scientific world and the Christian religion, well, no, because it's been taken over by, godless pagans. But if we're talking science, that is true knowledge and religion, then they're 100% compatible. Right? They're meant to go hand in hand. And the great scientific discoveries of the last 500 years that have ushered us into this modern era were largely made by believers in divinity, and some of them very Christian. It's funny that the heathen thinkers, the godless thinkers, are very often the philosophers and like the social influencers. But until very recently, the actual scientists, the people like getting things done, right? And making it so we have technology.
Building MRI machines and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. They were, in large part, godly people. That is, people who at least believed that there is a God and that there is a morality and there's an ethical way to behave and so forth based on a natural law. So
yeah,
but the heathen ones are the ones who try to claim credit for the technology of the Christian ones.
Yeah.
It's a bait and switch.
Yeah. So the overwhelming results of this study, the point is that there is a classical difference that affects all of these different areas that Christian parents would strive for. And I mean, for the most part, it says, okay, if you go public to kind of a private evangelical school, in most of these categories, you're taking a step up.
Yes.
But the step up that you take from the public to the normal private Lutheran school, right? Is that fair?
Yes.
That jump is not even as significant as the jump from if that private Lutheran school were to take on a classical role of doing education. Correct. Statistically, those jumps are even bigger.
Correct.
So it's a good to best kind of approach as far as the study has result. And by the way, Notre Dame they're not a classical college by any means.
They're not conservative either.
So this isn't some kind of inside job for Notre Dame. These studies very much push against what they are actually doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So do you find this rhyming? So there's the statistics. Do those statistics make sense?
Yeah. So without even doing the study, I could have told you that that's exactly what you should expect. And there's an obvious reason for it. The reason you're going to go from a jump from public school to private evangelical or private Lutheran school is because in a private Lutheran school, you are going to be teaching the Bible. You're going to have hopefully mostly Christian and mostly Lutheran teachers teaching the Bible to these children. And the Bible will do its work. However, the way most Lutheran church schools are set up, even though they want to have God in everything, in reality, most of their subject areas are what you would have taught in the public school. So you have math and you have science and you have literature and so forth, but you're basically following Common Core curriculum guides, exactly what the public school would do.
Is that a bad thing?
That's a very bad thing because it makes it look like religion is just another subject instead of an all-permeating core to everything that you're learning. God cannot be an add-on. Also because sometimes unknowingly, you're bringing in assumptions that simply are not biblical when you bring in curricula that are not explicitly Christian. So it's not enough, in other words, to not teach evolution. It'd be like, hey, cross that out in your textbook. it's not even enough to simply say, well, we believe in creation. You want to, through every step of the way of science, be marveling at God's design and God's creation. Same thing with mathematics, with God's order. Same thing with literature. What books are we choosing, and why would we let the secular world decide that for us?
I looked at one, and it was in a Lutheran, it was a Lutheran school. I think it was second or third grade. And I looked through, and I just was like, I got to look and see what some of these are. And I looked through, and every story had an aim of an agenda that I was like, I do not agree with that. Right?
Yes.
Now, why is that? Oh, if you go to the publisher's page and you go to the About Us page, what are they talking about? They're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that the chief issue that they're trying to overcome, and this is overtly on their page, and this is, I forget the name, but it's one of the biggest publishers. I mean, this is going to be all across most of our schools, private and public. And on that page, they're saying there's been a power assertion by white Christians throughout history. And therefore, for equity to take place, we need to reverse and push back against that. So we need to introduce stories that are against that kind of narrative, because we've been indoctrinated by Christian type thinking. So the way to fix that is to indoctrinate with non-Christian type thinking.
Yes.
So if that's the publisher's overt on their webpage, you don't have to like go on 4chan or anything crazy like that. Like just right there.
Exactly.
If that's their belief statement, and those publishers are then putting together a third grade curriculum, why do you think they're choosing the stories that they're choosing that your children are going to read throughout third grade?
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that they're going to have a potent effect on your kids?
Mm-hmm.
Well, those publishers believe it, or they wouldn't take on the endeavor of doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So if that's what they're doing, you're setting your kids up for failure if you have that religion class, which is good, and then they go immediately into reading stories and being formed by these stories that are helped to train them in a different way of thinking and a different value set.
Exactly. And what it makes is for sort of a schizophrenic view of reality. That is that you've got your religion on the one hand, and then you've got kind of real life on the other.
Mm-hmm.
And we simply cannot have that separation between the church and religion and life and knowledge and so forth. If God is the creator, and of course he is, and if the Bible is the truth, then all of that, God and his truth, will permeate every single subject that you learn about. Otherwise, it's in the end useless to know. This does not mean, though, that you're throwing out like much beloved books. So, for example, I went to a Lutheran school until I was 12 years old. It wasn't classical, but I learned English grammar, and a lot of what we learned was actually could be easily adapted into a classical model. So, for instance, at our classical Lutheran school, we read Laura Ingalls Wilder, right? It's good. It's a primary source. It doesn't teach anything even close to liberal or progressive. It teaches patriotism, hard work. The father is an actual man, right? Who leads his home, who loves his wife, who cares for his daughters, right? And a Lutheran school that's doing that right now is doing exactly what a classical school should be doing. You're using a primary source, and you're using something that you chose or somebody chose because it taught you not only history, but moral character and Christian virtue, right? And the test is, though, to do that throughout all of literature. So I also remember going to my Lutheran school, and we had a story time. This would have been third grade because it was Mrs. Albright. And she's, just such a kind teacher. I don't know how everyone looked really old when I was a little kid. So she might have just been like 50. I don't know. But I thought she was 90. But she's reading this book to us about this girl who was dying from leukemia after World War II, and she made a bunch of origami and so forth, and then she dies at the end. And the undertones were, what America did in dropping the atomic bombs, which of course we should talk about, right? But probably not just say America's bad, which was the undertone. And then also there was no Christianity whatsoever. In fact, there was the introduction of her sort of worship of ancestors and so forth in the book. Now, otherwise, it's a touching story of a girl who loves even as she's dying. And there's something to be lauded about that. But at the end of it, because I'm constantly thinking theologically, I raised my hand and I said, and I'm third grade, what are you, 8? And I said, but she went to hell. Because that's all I could think about.
Yeah.
Like, why is there no, she's just confessing a different religion and so forth. Now, the point here is that was the sort of popular book at the time, popular children's book. And my teacher didn't realize that it was introducing perhaps anti-American themes, right? Not that we shouldn't be talking about whether it was right or wrong to drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And maybe not a third grade discussion.
Probably not a third grade discussion. And you should bring in the fact that I believe it was Nagasaki, maybe Hiroshima. One of them was a Christian center, right? Had the most Christians more Christians there than all the rest of Japan. So,
interesting.
It's very much worthy of discussion, right? But you get themes introduced, and again, in Eastern religion, which is kind of faddish, right? In the 90s and the 80s and even now, to introduce these religions. And that's what progressive education gives you, right? Is the next fad, the next anti-American fad, the next, we should check out Eastern religions fad, the next Christless fad, right? And these things get very easily introduced when you're not purposefully looking for the best, right? And it's wonderful that Laura Ingalls Wilder, for a third grader, is the best.
Yeah.
Right? It's great. Charlotte's Web, have that at a classical school. Absolutely, right? The point is the selection of texts that are primary texts that actually flow from a Christian classical tradition. And a lot of the texts you then read, like in our conversation, we've talked about Charles Dickens, right? Well, Charles Dickens comes from the Christian tradition. So he fits into a classical education. Yeah. Right? Even
The Princess and the Goblin, George MacDonald, like there's a great children's book, you know, but a Christian, and there's great Christian themes that are built into like an overtly entertaining fairy tale.
Yeah, exactly. So this is not as a like this insurmountable task to bring these texts in and change the curriculum. Some of it's already happening. The point is that we do it with everything and realize that everything we teach, every single subject, is to form the whole man, the whole person, and not simply to put information in. And when we take material from the enemies of Christianity, or even people who just aren't thinking about Christianity whatsoever, then we are doing a disservice to our children if we can give them better. Now, sometimes you can say, but there's nothing wrong with it. And that's true. But as a parent, do you say, because like if it's not teaching anti-Christian stuff, a lot of times there is nothing wrong with it. But I don't feed my kids just like Wonder Bread and American cheese every day and say, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. Right? Instead, I try to get them whole grain bread and maybe some cheddar. Yeah. You know? In other words, we want to give the best, and we shouldn't be using excuses like, oh, but there's nothing wrong with it. Oh, but this is easier. Right? And it does become easier for people when it comes to education for teachers to be able to just use a textbook as opposed to using primary sources. Now, sometimes even in classical education, you're going to be using a textbook, so don't worry, right? Like mathematics, right? You're going to need a textbook. Yeah. But in literature, really? Or history, really? Let's get the primary sources. Let's get excited about them. And they give you so much more than what the textbook is going to give you. Because the textbook is always going to be from the perspective, and it's usually the secular perspective of the person who wrote it. And we don't even realize what we're missing. So for instance, I read through the Gallic War, the first book with my son and Pastor Richard this summer. We read it through in Latin. It was really fun, but you could read it through in English. You get the same content. And he's talking about the the zeal and ambition of the soldiers, and how the Germans would form a phalanx, which means that they have all of these shields interlocked, so you cannot penetrate the line. And Caesar's soldiers were so devoted to the cause of Rome and to glory, right, and to the cause of Caesar, that they go after that phalanx, which should be impenetrable, and they jump over so that they have to break the wall in order to block these Romans who are coming now from up on top of them. And then the other Romans are able to break the phalanx and it's gone, right?
Yeah.
And they crush the Germans. And you're reading that and it's like, do I want to read a textbook telling me about that? Or do I want to read Caesar?
Yeah.
With all of its like, and then have a teacher explain to me that you see the ambition there? You see how much they are willing to go through, risk their lives for an earthly cause? Well, look at us Christians, right? Look, we have a far greater cause to be zealous for, right? And we should be way more ambitious than these Romans for Rome were for Rome as Christians, right? These are the things you can do when you are engaged in the actual texts, because they're always going to give you, as we talked before, they're always going to give you discussions about morality and about religion and important things that form the character of young children and older children. And that's very often what's taken out of the textbooks that are given through Common Core.
How tough would it be for a, let's say like a standard Lutheran school? How tough would it be for them to go to a classical approach? Like you said, some of these books are going to stay the same. Maybe some of the curriculums change. What would that process look like?
Yeah, so I think, especially in the first few years, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, I think it would be a rather easy transition because you're going to be dealing with more like grammar-based approach, which actually helps the children learn better, repetition and so forth, memorization. But the big changes come, and as we said, you can use like Laura Ingalls Wilder. There's all sorts of what we use. Lutheran schools are already using, right? Because we stuck with what was good. Winnie the Pooh is good for. I mean, there are wonderful things. But when you start getting into fourth, fifth, sixth, so forth, it does become a little more work, and maybe a lot more work for the teacher if he doesn't know the content, because you can't rely on a textbook anymore. But you can read the textbook, right? You can want to pick one that's very informative and Christian and so forth, but you're going to have to make selections of primary source material and give that to them, and you're going to have to lecture a bit more because you can't rely on a textbook to just kind of like be the teacher for this class. Again, if you're in math, you just use Saxon math, right? So you use what we would consider just a better approach to math, but you're still teaching math.
Not a big transition there.
Not a huge transition there.
Yeah. Like literature would probably be the biggest
literature,
transition.
History, theology. It's a matter of going to the primary sources.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think there can really be an argument on this that going to the primary sources is better. It's going to bring you into the world of Caesar like a textbook can't do. And it's also going to excite kids. Well, you're reading Caesar. You realize he lived 2,000 years ago, right? And you're reading him. Right?
We've got a family in our church. Their daughters were classically trained. They ended up going to Hillsdale, and she was telling me the story that when they were in high school, I think they were freshmen in high school, maybe sophomores, and they were at a movie theater. And so Nancy and Ron are their names, and they were out in like the lobby of the movie theater. And this lady comes up and she goes, "Are your daughters in the bathroom?" You're like, "Uh-oh." Like,
what
yeah.
are they doing?
And she's like, "They're in there talking about Plato." And like, here were these like young girls that were discussing, justice and Plato, and, and they're just blown away.
Yeah. What makes a good society.
Yeah.
Yep.
So not only are the kids reading that and proving that they're capable of doing it.
Yes.
You don't have to go for your PhD in the classics to go read Plato, right?
No.
You can do this as a freshman, sophomore in high school.
Exactly.
Not only that, they're at the movie theater to go watch who knows what, and they're excited enough about what they're learning that they're having that conversation. Like they are enjoying learning.
And by the way, they're going to be able to process that movie better, criticize it better.
Mm-hmm.
What is it trying to teach me here? Oh,
Yep.
Is there a feminist theme in this one? So forth and so on. The other thing is that people will have the impression that, these are inaccessible texts, it's very hard to understand and so forth. And very often it's the opposite. As long as you introduce it to the students, it's far more fun,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let me give you, for instance, and this would be Herodotus' histories. So he's the first great historian of the Western world. He lives in the 5th century BC, and he tells the history of the Persian War, this great war where Persia tries to take over Greece, and Greece actually fights back against Persia and wins,
Mm-hmm.
right? Amazing, this tiny little country. And if you were to get like a textbook version of that, they would take out everything fun.
Hmm.
They would take out everything that they considered to be like more like legendary and mythological, because they've got a secular mind and they don't think in terms of spirits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And dreams affecting people's decisions. Well, we know from the Bible, we know from our own lives that dreams affect people's decisions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Look at Daniel, look at Joseph, look at Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in Herodotus, you have Xerxes making the decision to go to war against Greece. And he's got, on the one hand, his advisors telling him to do it. And then on the other hand, a dream that's haunting him, saying, don't do it. Don't you dare do it. Right? And so he has this conflict. And it's a real conflict. Well, what are they going to do in your textbook? They're not going to tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to tell you about the conflict that a world leader has between whatever that is, God, a devil, an angel, his own conscience, telling him, no, you can't do this. I got a feeling against this. And then his advisor is saying, go.
Yeah.
Right? And likewise, Herodotus' history, and they'll remove this too, he begins the history by saying, well, what was the actual cause of the Persian War? Well, let's look at the causes of wars in general. And he says, basically, every war has been caused by a woman, right? Somebody loving a woman. And so you get Helen of Sparta becoming Helen of Troy because she was stolen. Europa also stolen. And people fight over these wives, right, that they've lost, who've been stolen from them. Now you can say, oh, that's legend, that's myth. How true is it to real life, though? And then you start realizing that a lot of huge, momentous decisions with world-changing consequences happened simply because a guy's in love with a girl,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's very relevant knowledge. It gets you to know what's actually most important in people's lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the home will actually matter more to some guy that you consider so great. So let's say you consider, Steph Curry.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who don't know, he's a basketball player.
Yeah.
He's the best 3-point shooter like ever. You consider him great, right? It might be that he retires from basketball because his life with his wife and his children is far more important than him setting some career goal.
Mm-hmm.
You get the point? This happens.
It's the same, not the same story. It's the same narrative. These things are rhyming, right? So as you went through all these examples, I keep thinking, man, there's so much we could dissect about that.
Yeah.
Right. There's so much you could converse with about that. And not because you've got a PhD and I've got a master's degree, but you could certainly get 8th graders to be interested in those concepts. Right?
Yeah.
What do you think it was? Do you think it was his conscious? Do you think it was a dream? Do you think God was speaking to him? How do you interact with, when your conscious tells you one thing and your advisors or friends tell you another thing? And how does that play out in your life? And
How's this playing out in modern politics?
Yeah. Like that's...
Does President Biden go through these?
Right.
Yeah.
What an open door for conversation versus, what date did Xerxes live at again? Okay. And what nation did he conquer?
Yeah, exactly.
How far were those two? How far do they have to travel? Like, goodness gracious. How are you going to talk about that at the lunch table? You're not. So you're going to talk about Instagram or something else that's going to fill that void that's been left from awakening a childlike hunger and thirst for learning these stories and wrestling with the reality of things that's there.
Yeah. And what you're also going to see in going through these sources and going to the original text is that you're going to see how well they fit with the biblical texts. People are going to be able to place them. So Xerxes is living at 20 years or so after Daniel dies, right? Daniel, in one of his prophecies, talks about Xerxes, right? Talks about Alexander the Great, right? A century and a half later. And so you're able to connect things, and the Bible is no longer just this religious book over here while you've got another history over here. Everything is connected, but the biblical account is obviously respected as the greatest authority, but you see the context for it. And then you see that God is working through all of this history in order to come to the fullness of time when the Son of God is born of a virgin, right? And you see that, well, why does it matter that Xerxes attacked Greece? Well, guess what happens? 150 years later, Greece, in the form of Philip of Macedon, Philip was his dad, but Alexander the Great of Macedon, takes over all of Persia. And the reason they did that is because they were still mad at the Persians for being their overlords 150 years before. And he takes it, and what does he do? He spreads the Greek language everywhere. And what language is the Greek New Testament written in? And why is it written in Greek? It's because everyone in the world, the known world, can talk Greek. And who did that? Alexander the Great. And why did he do it? Well, because he hated the Persians. And how do you know about the Persians, right? And who's the first Persian? Oh, that's Cyrus or Darius, who's in the book of Daniel, right? And so you see God forming all of history in order to get his word out in the fullness of time. And that word, of course, is Jesus Christ, but that word was written in Greek. And then it was spread through Roman roads and in a peaceful Roman Empire, right? The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, so that at the perfect historical time, God becomes a man. And you see, it's so wonderful. And you can actually teach this in a way that cannot be taught without the original sources.
And how much more does that root the child to fall into that 90% category that says, yeah, the Bible doesn't sound like a bunch of baloney.
Exactly.
It actually fits into the narrative of the world and it makes sense of everything.
Yeah.
So therefore I'm going to go to church 3 times a week or 3 times a month.
Yeah.
You know, that makes everything,
because this is reality.
Yeah. As you said, I don't even need those statistics because I know that's what's going to work.
Yeah.
Versus this one person you said who's just, well, that's some biblical text. That's religion and that's faith and stuff. But then I go over here and I study social studies, which tells me what the world's really like. It's like completely different formative process.
Yeah. And by the way, show them the classical myths, the actual myths, and then compare those with the histories of the Old Testament, and they'll know what myth is. And they'll know that the Bible is not myth. Genesis 1-3 is written as a history, and evening and morning was the first day. Evening and morning was the second day. The entire thing is written as a history. And you compare that with what, I don't want to be dismissive, but the nonsense that is Greek mythology, right? Where it's so obviously fairy tale-ish, right? And there is no mistaking it. When people say, oh, that's myth, they have never read myth before. When they say that about the Bible, you've obviously never read myth because mythology is weird. Okay.
Prometheus and Zeus and what Zeus does to Prometheus and
eagles eating out your liver every day and then it magically grows back, right? Find that in the Bible.
Yeah.
And the things that they say in the Bible that, that's legend and that's mythological. So let's take an example. Let's take Samson. And the stupidest, weirdest thing that Samson does is what? He ties up 1,000 foxes. I think it's 1,000, maybe it's 300, to torches, their tails to torches. And he throws them into a Philistine field. And he burns their field down. It's like, this couldn't possibly have. This is a legend. Give me a break. Well, guess what? You read in Ovid's Fausti, and you see that this was a regular practice. They did it every year. They had a ceremony for it. They had tied it. This is history. They tied torches to foxes' tails and ran them through at the it might have been at the end of the year after they've harvested, in order to burn down the fields
Mm-hmm.
so that it would be more fertile the next year. Right?
Yeah.
So reading the actual sources will get you into the frame of mind to be able to say, no, that's not legend
Mm-hmm.
at all. That's not myth at all. That actually happens in history. I know what myth looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That traditional understanding, that orthodox understanding of the infallible word of God, right?
Yeah.
It cements that into the minds of children because it's truth and because truth shines bright.
Yeah. And with a good teacher who's excited about that, yeah, it happens every day.
Mm-hmm.
And you see all of the different subjects just organically coming together.
Mm-hmm.
Because God, as I said before, he's the designer, that's science. He's the orderer,
Mm-hmm.
that's math. He is the subject of literature because he's the creator of human feelings, emotions. He makes states rise and fall. Men and women rise and fall. He's the establisher of the three estates, the family, the church, and civil society. He's the one who moves all of history, right? So everything comes together in a classical education, and that is the point. The last thing is that a classical education would be worse than useless. It would be very damaging if it weren't Christian, first and foremost. And we're going to see that too, as people seeing that, classical education makes you smart, because it does, right? But you remove God from that and it will simply become dangerous, right? Because we don't want really smart people who don't believe in God.
That's a dangerous thing.
They're dangerous. I'd rather have stupid people who don't believe in God.
Which
right?
we have.
Yeah, so this movement toward the classical without the Christian, or the classical without the Lutheran, I don't buy it for a second. I don't think it's going to go anywhere good. There are colleges starting like that. I think the further you move away from Christianity, the further you move away from Christianity, the further you move away from the usefulness, the godliness of what education is meant to be. So they have to be molded. And so I would rather have that private Lutheran school than just a classical school. In other words, I would rather you send your kid to Concordia Seward, as it is right now, which is actually starting a classics degree. That's exciting. Than I would to some heathen classical school. Mm-hmm. And I could point to the classical college and say, that's better academics because they're learning this and this and this and this and this, right? But at the same time, it's not even reality. Mm-hmm. It's not focused. It's not pious. It's not, what we're about if it's not Christian.
Mm-hmm. And are you optimistic that you're going to see these moves? I mean, as you said, the churches that are the schools that are opening, that are starting fresh in the LCMS, they're saying, well, of course we're going to do classical, right? Are you very optimistic between Luther, classical college, between these schools that are opening, between some of these shifts, some of these studies that are showing? Are you optimistic that you're going to see a resurgence of proper education and the formation of children towards godly men and women here in our church body, here in America?
100%. Yeah. If I knew that Jesus would not come back in the next 100 years, then the easiest thing to predict would be that the resurgence of classical Christian education and the beautiful effect it will have on the Lutheran Church in the United States and in our homes and so forth. I'm so excited for it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still hope that Jesus comes back like today.
Yeah,
but
maybe right after we have lunch. Well, as a father of children, I'm very excited that these things are happening. It gives hope. It gives contentment. It gives peace. It's good to see God working in these ways. So thank you for all you're doing. And if someone wanted to learn more about these things, you've already highlighted for the college, but if they wanted to learn more from you, I've got a long list of questions that we didn't get to, so we're going to have to get you back on again. But if they wanted to learn more from you, where could they locate you specifically?
So you can contact me at capreus7, so CAPREUS7 at gmail.com. I always love getting emails. And you can check me out on YouTube. We have We have Christian Culture Podcast that we also do. So that's on YouTube, Spotify, things like that, where we have conversations with guys like Adam Kuntz and so forth. And you can, again, check out lutherclassical.org, our website, to get more informed about the college.
Very nice. We'll put both of those in the description as well.
All right.
Christian, nice talking with you.
Great talking with you, Brian.
Yeah. God bless.
God bless.